Start the recording. Perfect. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the training, Storytelling Using Data Visualizations. I'll be giving the training today. My name is Laura van Vledder. I'm from the Netherlands. I work at ORTEC, specifically ORTEC Data Science and Consulting. As you might know, ORTEC is one of the co-founders of Analytics for a Better World. I specifically work for as an analytics consultant at the ORTEC Data Science and Consulting department. And what we focus on is making custom applications for our customers, where I'm mostly focusing on building the solution at the back end, but also the front end. So that's where the data visualization comes in. Where I try to visualize the data in a user interface. So that's a little bit about me and my work. I thought, as an introduction of me personally, let me use some data visualizations as well. So I've tried to visualize me in with some data. So I'm 28 years old. The life expectancy of people born in 1995 is 80. So I'm about a third of the way. I've lived in a couple of places throughout my life. In the Netherlands, I've lived in The Hague, close to Utrecht, Maastricht, and now currently in Amsterdam. But around the world, I've made a little sidestep to Malaysia when I was a preteen, and lived in Sweden for half a year for my Erasmus, so half a year of exchange. And as hobbies, I've plotted the hobbies from my age from 0 until now, and when I've started or ended those hobbies. So traveling has been a constant throughout my life. Dancing has been mostly there since ever since I was a kid until I became an adult. When I went to university, I quit. Played tennis throughout my childhood. Also played a little bit of saxophone. Did some rowing during university, and when COVID hit, I took up the hobby of crocheting and going to the gym. I'm currently crocheting a cardigan, but that is taking quite a bit of time. So if you get into crocheting, make sure that you have enough time on your hands. So that's a little bit about me. Today I'll be giving the course of storytelling with data visualization. And to get started, I would like to know what your expectations are of this course. So what I'd like you to do is scan this QR code. I will also show a link where you can go to. I will put that on my screen. I think everyone can see the QR code and the slido.com and the number. If not, okay, great. Perfect. I already see a few of you typing. So I would like to know what you expect of this course today. Great narrative. Dope introductions. Thanks. Okay, tips is a big one. As you can see, this is also a data visualization. Word clouds is a way to use qualitative data to visualize it. So a little bit of data visualization immediately here as well. So looking at these, it's mostly about tips and best practices. I see a few of using pictures, how to tell a story, how to be a geek. I like that one. I don't know if I can teach you that in this course, but maybe a different one. How to ask questions, thinking about visuals, learn new things. I hope you will learn new things. I don't know what things you already know. How to adapt to your audience, we'll definitely touch upon that. I see a few of you typing still, so let's take 1 more minute. And then I think we have most of the responses. So tools to use for visualization, some tips, new ways of visualizing, storyline, story versus visualizations. Okay, we'll touch upon, I think, most of these. Yeah, I think we'll touch upon most of them. I think we can go onto the agenda. Also, feel free to interrupt at any time to ask a question in the chat. Also, when by every step of the way, by the end of each section, I'll make sure that there's time for questions. And if you would have expected something to be mentioned in that part, let us know and we can touch upon those as well. I'm hoping to touch upon most of these topics that are mentioned here in this word cloud. If not, let me know, and I hope we can. I can still answer a few of your questions. All right, let me go back to the PowerPoint. So the agenda of today is, well, we've already had our little introduction. Then we'll talk about the power of visualization. So why do we actually need visualizations? What is the use of them? And then we're going to go through a step-by-step process. Step 1 is understanding the context. Step 2, choosing the appropriate visualization. Step 3, to eliminate clutter in your visualization. Step 4 is drawing attention to the right part of your visualization, and some final tips and closure. As I said in the beginning, before the recording started, there will be a few exercises in between. And there will also be a break, so no worries. We won't be sitting down for 4 hours straight. Without further ado, let's get into it. Let's start with the power of visualization. So why are visualizations so important? Let's take a look at these 4 series. They are 4 series with an x-axis and a y-axis and data points to map those. And if you look at these series, it's very hard to tell what they mean. You have no idea by just looking at these how each point relates to each other, what the pattern is. It's very difficult to tell. But if you would put them into a visualization, it suddenly becomes much clearer what the series is telling us. So when we look at series 1, we see that there's the data points are a bit more scattered. Series 2 is a nice arch. Series 3 is basically a straight line with one outlier. And series 4 is everything on one x-axis point except for one, which you wouldn't be able to tell from just looking at the table. So a visualization tells a story very quickly, and people can really interpret them very quickly. Let's look at another example. If we look at this phrase, when D is inside B and A contains both B and C, where B and C don't overlap, the question is, do C and D have an overlap? Yes or no? If you would just read the sentence and think about it, it's very hard to make this visualization in your head. It is much easier to ask this question when we have a visualization attached to it. So this is a visual of what is said at the top, and then asking the question, do C and D overlap, is a lot easier. You can see immediately that C and D do not overlap. And it gives the same information as was said in the top sentence. So a visualization is really, truly important to get a message across quickly. So just to have a little quote, the purpose of computing is insights, not numbers. So the insights are way more important than the numbers that are attached to it. Is there an increase? Is there a decrease? Is much more important than the numbers attached to it themselves.
Laura?
Yeah.
One question in the chat. Ava would like to know, for curiosity, why did you plot the blue line in the graphs?
The one from this one. I didn't actually plot these. They were an example. This is more important in the first chart because that shows the trend between these data points. The other ones, you don't need the trend line. Yep.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Good question. Any other questions? I don't think so. Otherwise, Kate would have let me know. So continuation. Today, we'll be talking about storytelling with data visualization. And this is the basic process that you can follow. As you might tell, step 1 through step 4 is something that you've already seen in the agenda. This is from a book, Storytelling with Data. If you're interested to get more in-depth knowledge about storytelling with data, I highly recommend to read this book. We'll touch upon topics of this book during this course. What we'll focus on in this session is, like I said, step 1 through 4. So if we go back, we'll see that thinking like a designer and returning to your storyboards to tell a story arc. So basically, how to create a plot is something that we will not touch upon here. We'll talk mostly about the context, making that clear, and choosing the visuals and how to make a compelling visual. So that's what we're going to do today. Before I go to step 1, are there any questions?
No.
No? Okay, great. Then let's start with step 1, understand the context. So data visualization doesn't actually start with data visualization. It starts with the question, who are you showing the data and what do they need to know? So let's get into a little bit more detail. You have a difference between exploratory data and explanatory data. With exploratory data, it's about the whole analysis. And it's about finding a needle in a haystack and comparing. So this is where, for instance, dashboards come into play. It's really about understanding your data, figuring out what might be interested, and then analyzing and browsing your data and finding that one result. Explanatory data is you've found this needle in a haystack and you're now going to explain this and give a call to action to your stakeholders. So it's not about everything you've analyzed. You found in your exploratory phase all the data and all the points, but you've picked one and you're going to explain that one point. So it's a specific overview of the results that you've presented. In this course, we'll be focusing on the explanatory bits. So you've already done your research and you now want people to take action based on what you've found. So I saw in the word cloud of the expectations about dashboarding. We will actually not focus on dashboarding because that is in the exploratory phase of this process, while we're going to be focusing on the explanatory. That doesn't mean that the tips and tricks about choosing a chart that you cannot apply that to your dashboard. But dashboarding is a whole nother field, and I think I could make another 4-hour training of just dashboarding. So today we're going to be focusing on the explanatory part. So to understand the context, there are 3 things that you need to figure out. Who is your audience? So what stakeholders are there? Who are they? And who would your stakeholder be if you would narrow down to one person? For instance, you could say, I would like to talk to my manager to approve a certain budget. That would then be, it could be that your stakeholders are all the managers, but you could narrow down to the one person that holds the budget. It could also be that you're trying to convince people to donate for the charity that you work for. You could narrow this down to one person saying a 35-year-old woman that you're trying to convince. So it could really help to narrow it down to one person. So once you know who is your audience, you can then focus on what needs to be addressed. So what do you need your audience to know or do, and why should they care? Especially why should they care is important, because if they shouldn't care, then why are you telling the story? So the why should they care about what you're telling them and what needs to be addressed is very important to make sure you're telling the right story. Let's say that you do not feel confident about recommending a certain action. You can also encourage a discussion. So you might have found your needle in a haystack and you don't know if you can recommend something immediately. It could also be that you're trying to get a discussion going. That could also be what needs to be addressed. What you really want to avoid is the, oh, that's interesting, let's move on effect. So they should really need to know what is at stake, because otherwise it's, nice piece of data, okay, what now? So make sure that you have that clear as well of why they care. I think that's all what I wanted to tell for the what bit. Then how will data help make your point? So you know who your audience is, you know what needs to be addressed, and now you have data to support that story. So the questions that you can ask here are, what data is available that will help make your point? And data will become the supporting evidence of your story. This also means that you should not be ignoring data that does not support your case, because misleading will likely backfire. So make sure that you include all the information and don't keep information out or ignore certain part of information, because people that are aware of the topic will pin right through that. So to give an example of the who, what, and how, you might have the who is to convince your manager of a proof of concept. So you've done the proof of concept and now you would like to do the full project. What needs to be addressed might be that they need to know the potential value and benefits of the problem. So the POC, the proof of concept, was a success, and we would like X budget to be approved. And how can we show data to help support that point? Could be that we show the data of the results of the proof of concept, so the before and after situation. So before the proof of concept, this was the value, and after the proof of concept, this was the value of what has been delivered. Any questions so far?
Iman would like to know, so is the goal the why they care?
The goal, what do you mean with the goal?
Yeah, for this, when you explain the what needs to be addressed, so why they care. For example, if they care about something in the budget, so I mean, this is the goal for the whole project. So when you providing the example for addressing a manager about the proof of concept, so the goal is to have that budget or that fund. So here you want, for example, as the one who interested about something, you provide or you deliver the goal that you want. So this is like the core or the heart of the whole the three categories: the who, what, and how. Because how, I think it's about explaining or showing or providing evidence, but the what is your goal for providing all of this. Is this correct? I'm just having that question to get, is this my insight correct or not?
Yeah, so indeed, the what is mostly about what you would like to achieve and what you need to tell your stakeholders to achieve that goal. So if they need to know what is at stake, so, and what needs to be addressed. So you could have one goal, which is getting a certain budget, for instance. If your stakeholder is someone else, you might want to also show something else. So the what is really about the message that you want to tell them. We'll get into more detail about this in a later slide as well. Okay, I see a check mark, so I think that answers the question. All right, then let's continue. To clarify this message, what you could use is a 3-minute story. So what do you want to communicate with your visual, and what is the story? So you can have a short narrative that summarizes the following elements, introducing the context and the background of the context, then a topic of importance that could be something like a business challenge or a KPI, framed in terms of your audience. Then we have the goal, so what needs to change, and the solution, so how will or did you bring about these changes. This 3-minute story, so this is a story of in 3 minutes in total, can really help you form your message. Let's say you have a presentation that you're going to do for this manager, and they have been in back-to-back meetings, and instead of 30 minutes, you have 15 minutes. And within those 15 minutes, you first have some chit chat. The manager wanted to ask you things, and now you only have 3 minutes left to make your point. Having this 3-minute story ready can really help you clarify what exactly you want to come across, to get across. So it's really good as a backup in case your presentation time is cut short. And you can use it to share your work at impromptu moments. So let's say you're on a coffee walk with a colleague and you want to quickly explain your work, then having this 3-minute story is really helpful. So before you actually start making this a visualization, having this story, this 3-minute story can really help benefit your presentation in the end. To create this 3-minute story, it's a good idea to articulate your big idea. So you've analyzed your data, you know it well, and next it's time to communicate your learnings from it to someone else. And the big idea is a concept that can help get clear get clear on the main message that you want to get across to the audience. So it's really the main message, and it's one complete sentence that articulates our point of view and conveys what is at stake in the situation. So it's just one sentence, one grammatically correct sentence, which should encapsulate who is your audience and what is at stake for that person. So who is your audience is a list of primary people that you will communicate to. That could be a group of potential donors that you're trying to convince. That could be C-level people that you're trying to convince of budget. It could be anyone. Like I said before, it could be handy to narrow it down to one person. Who would that person be? And what does your audience care about? So try to step into the skin of your audience to see what they care about. That could really help with creating a story that will encapsulate them. And what action do you want them to take? Do you want them to approve the budget? Do you want them to donate money? Do you want them to whatever? It could be anything. But there needs to be a call to action. And then the next important question is, what is at stake? So what are the benefits if your audience acts in the way that you want them to? Or what is at risk if they don't? If they don't act as you ask them to act, what will happen? What are the consequences if they don't? And what is the benefits if they do? So this is your big idea that summarizes this in one sentence, and taking time to craft the big idea up front helps us achieve clarity and concise on the overall idea, which needs to be communicated to our audience, making it easier and more streamlined to plan the content to get your key message across. And we'll practice this. So this is our first exercise of today. We're going to take a few minutes to choose a recent or current project that you're currently working on, and filling out the who and the what on the big idea worksheet for that project. If you don't have a project, I do have an Excel file that could help you, that you can use as inspiration for this exercise. And then the second part is to construct your single big idea sentence. And once you've done that, is your big idea positively or negatively framed? And what is the benefit or risk of this big idea? And how would you reframe it to be the opposite point of view? So if it's positive, how would you frame it to be negative, and the opposite way around? Kate, do you have the zip file for exercise 1 in GitHub, and could you share it?
Yeah, I just dropped the link in the chat.
Okay, perfect. I think what we'll do is take about 15 minutes for this exercise. So that would mean we'll get back, let's take 10 to 15 minutes. I'll get back at 2:45 Dutch time, and see how everyone's going with this exercise. Before we start, are there any questions?
So if everyone goes to the link for the GitHub, there's the exercises are in that folder. You can download that, and then the template is in that folder.
Sorry, why should it be a big idea? It could be a small idea.
It's yeah, it could be a small idea. It's just about a project and what point you want to get across to your audience. But it could be a small idea indeed. It's just how the book calls it. The book calls it a big idea.
It's just to aim high.
Exactly, exactly. Shoot for the stars.
All right, so then they have 10 minutes to work on this, right?
Yep, and I'll check in. If 10 minutes is not enough, we can add an additional 5. Okay, good luck. I'll be here if there are any questions. Also, the slides that I just presented are also in the zip folder, so you can flip back to see if you don't remember everything I said. That might be handy for the exercise. Then if there are no further questions, good luck, and I'll be here. We will not have a certain amount of profitability, etc. So that is something that might happen in the future that you could address if things do not get, if they do not act the way you want them to act, for instance. Does that answer your question?
Actually, maybe the use case that I selected might be a bit challenging.
Okay.
So maybe I can think about something that is less challenging that I can collect data for. But yeah, it answers. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no worries. How's everyone doing? I see a thumbs up from Kevin.
I have a question regarding data. What if the audience does not understand if there's partial data, like oftentimes on the ground when you're working with NGOs, there is no data, and it's hard to, like, people often at decision maker levels have really grand visions of what they want. So how do you bridge the gap for your audience? And oftentimes it's the decision makers who see the visualization of the data and not the people on the ground and communities in the grassroots. So how do you kind of be realistic with your audience and make sure the audience understands as well?
Yeah, good question. When we go into the second step, which is choosing your visualization, we'll also talk about which visualizations are easy to understand for certain audiences and which visualizations might be appropriate for a bit more of a scientific audience. So there you can choose between different visualizations, and I understand your concern about, for instance, it could be with NGOs that you talk with farmers that are illiterate. They don't know how to read. How do you then convey your story using data? That becomes very difficult, because if they're illiterate and they cannot read, you can still show shapes like a bar chart, for instance, because that is easy to compare heights. But showing a single number, a line, a
In
table.
my experience, it's the farmers who are not the problem. It's usually like the funders, or they expect too much grand data, which is not there.
Okay.
And they expect, I mean, you don't speak, like in India, where I come from, where we work in, we don't use visualization that much.
Mm-hmm.
We use language, and sometimes we use visualization, and it does work, and it's easier to convey to
Mm-hmm.
people. But it's more who are like, my concern is, how do you explain to decision maker that this is happening, and how do you manipulate the data in a way that they understand that there is not enough, like, you can't answer every question for them, and they expect too much from data. Maybe it's outside the purview of this exercise, but this is an issue that I come close to a lot.
That there's just not, that they're wanting to know more.
They want to know a lot more than there is, in terms of, and like, maybe it's a behavioral change on their part that needs to be brought in. It's more of a top-down approach than a bottom-up approach in their mind.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, we know what's right, and you can't question us. And it might be a bit steering the wheel somewhere else, but yeah. And usually people on the ground are more aware about their challenges, and they explain it well just in their own language. That's about it.
Yep.
And we just have to interpret it. So
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, I understand the struggle. I think it's a bit outside of the scope of this training, as you mentioned, but I think what is most important is, in this case, to really know what your stakeholder is looking for and be preemptive about the sort of questions that you might expect. So you know already that they might want to ask a lot of questions and expect a lot of data. You could start the conversation with, this is all the data that we have. It entails X, Y, Z, and this is what information we've gotten out of this. Just because that will at least make sure that they know what to expect from the data that you have. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no worries. All right. Then I think we're ready to move on. I have a little example of when your idea and your story is not so clear, or you don't know what stakeholder you have in front of you. It's a video. Kate, you might be able to help. I don't know if I shared my screen, if then the audio will also be immediately there from the video.
Let's try. I can let you know if I don't hear the audio.
Okay, great. Let's try. It's someone that we unfortunately all know. That is the main character of this video.
No audio.
No audio. Okay. So let me stop my sharing and let me try to reshare. I don't know if it is under advanced sharing options.
Actually, there is a checkbox, I think you will find, so you can check for sharing sounds, and you can share videos with sound.
Where can I find this?
When you click share screen, I think in that pop-up window, you will find in the bottom of this, there is a
yeah.
button with share sound.
Yeah, it says computer audio, and then I think
Yeah.
I can share stereo. Share sound. I found it. Great. All right, let's try. Let's try from the beginning.
Look at some of these charts.
Can you hear it now?
Yeah, it's good.
Let's look.
And if you look at death,
It's started to go up
here's
again.
one. Well, right here, the United States is lowest in numerous categories. We're lower than the world.
Lower than the
lower
world?
than
What is that?
Europe.
In
Take a
what?
look.
In what?
Take a look. Right here. Here's case death.
Oh, you're doing death as a proportion of cases. I'm talking about death as a proportion of population. That's where the US is really bad.
Well,
Much worse than South Korea, Germany, etc.
you can't do that. You have
Why
to go,
can't I do that?
You have to go by where, look, here is the United States. You have to go by the cases. The cases
Why
are
not
there.
as a proportion of
When we have
population?
somebody, what it says is when you have somebody that where there's a case, the people that live from those cases.
It's surely a relevant statistic to say if the US has X population and X percentage of death of that population versus
you
South
have to
Korea.
go by the cases.
Well, look at South Korea, for example. 51 million population, 300 deaths. It's like, it's crazy
you don't
compared to
know
other
that.
countries. I do. It's on
You
the.
don't know that.
You think they're faking their statistics? South Korea,
I
an
won't get
advanced
into
country.
that because they have a very good relationship
Yeah.
with the country, but you don't know that. And they have spikes. Look, here's
Germany
one.
low,
Here's
9,000.
one. Here's one right here, United States. You take
Anyway.
the number of cases.
Okay.
Now look, we're last, meaning we're first.
Last, I don't know.
So here was an example of when you do not know who your audience is and you're trying to manipulate your data as well to convey the story that you want to convey, and you see that it almost always backfires. So know who your audience is and try not to manipulate your data so that you can get your point across. AKA don't be like Trump. I think that's a good tip for just in general, not only with this specific case. So once you know your context, we can move on to step 2, using an appropriate visual. So how do you choose an appropriate visual? Let's look at a few examples. So let's try to answer this question. Obesity is on average inversely proportional to the average education of the population, meaning that if the population is more highly educated, they're less likely to be obese, and the other way around. So our question is, can we show the evidence of this using data visualization? We're going to go through a few examples that might be able to show this evidence and the importance of the right visualization. So let's start with the first one. This one shows on the left the percentage of the degree or higher, and on the right is the percentage of obese people. And the circle shows what percentage that is from 0 to 100. And there's a circle per state. What do we think about this visualization? I think we can put it in the chat and Kate can consolidate the answers.
Confusing, not very clear, misleading, not intuitive, overlapping, population visual, opposite of what you said, can't recognize patterns, looks like a representation that people who are educated are obese. There's no legend, no correlation.
All in all, a very sucky chart, I think is the consensus. Yeah, so the circles are very hard to interpret. You don't know what 100% is. You don't know what 0, well, we do know what 0 is, which means it would be just a dot, but they're very hard to compare. They're not easy to interpret. And like someone said, on the East Coast, there are a lot of states, so a lot of overlapping circles. You actually think it shows the opposite, which is not true. It does show the data correctly, but because you think it shows the opposite, you know that this is not a very good chart. So let's try to look at a different example. Here we have two different maps, one showing the degree and one showing people that are obese. This time a color chart, a heat map, where a lower color shows less education and a higher color shows more education. And the same goes for obesity. A lower tint of yellow shows low obesity, and a higher tint of yellow, and I guess brown or red shows higher percentages of obesity. What do we think of this chart?
Needs a lot of work to understand, difficult to see the correlation, better with the shading, but the blue, it's hard to tell the difference. Difficult to infer the relationship between two charts. Why aren't the charts together? Difficult to see the correlation, but easier to understand. Does geography matter? It's a bit cleaner, it's a bit clearer. For colorblind people, this might be challenging. Okay.
Yeah, I think this summarizes the things that I also wanted to say about this chart. It's difficult to compare two different images together. So you still need to go back and forth. You still need to look at, oh, Texas, okay, is that color blue? And Texas is that color red? What does that mean? So it's still hard to see the correlation because there are two different maps. You also have a bit of the state problem where larger states are more visible than smaller states. And the remark about color blindness. This is actually okay for, I'm not colorblind, but this is actually okay for people that are colorblind because it uses a gradient in the same color scheme. Color blindness is mostly between, or the most common color blindness is between red and green. So try not to use those two colors in the same chart. But blue and yellow are actually quite fine to use together. And the gradient is actually also okay for colorblind people. Do states matter? They matter in the sense that you want to show it per state, but not necessarily geographical location. So it doesn't matter if it's in the south or the north, etc. Okay, let's move on to another visualization. So again, here you have the degree on the left and the obesity on the right in percentages, and they're ranked from highest to lowest in both cases. So you see that District of Columbia, it might be a little bit hard to read, but the District of Columbia has 45% of a bachelor degree or higher. And in Mississippi, who is the highest obesity level, has around 35%. And it says it for every single state.
What's the relation between BA and obesity?
So we're trying to prove that there is a negative relationship between higher education and obesity. So if people are more highly educated, they're less likely to be obese. Or
Okay.
if you can also do it the other way around, if they are obese, they're less likely to be higher educated.
Yeah, gotcha. But it's a kind of a hypothesis that you are trying to prove by data.
Yes. We're trying to visualize this with data.
Yeah.
In the chat, the comments are that it's not matching up, so difficult to correlate because you have to go side by side. Wish the states were side by side. Time consuming to compare each state. Wall of text. Switch narrative of one if the variables. Use scatter plot instead. Too much information, difficult to read.
Yep.
You know, there is a problem about the data as well, that you don't know if the person who has BA is the same person who is obese or not. So reconciliation of the data is a key to be able to give accurate figure out of that.
Yeah, so we're just aggregating based on the states, but yes, it could be that there's one person that's obese and highly educated, but there could also be someone that is not obese and lower educated, or the other way around. Yeah, that could definitely happen. But with the aggregated results, we're trying to show this relationship, which does exist. We're just trying to show it with data. Yeah, like most people mentioned, the ranked lists in different categories are better to interpret. So each chart separately is good to interpret because you can see the lines decreasing or increasing. But they're not easy to compare because you need to look at each state separately again. So you need to go, oh, District of Columbia is high on this list. Okay, where is it on the other list? Okay, that is pretty low, sure. Let me look at all the different states. So the correlation is still hard to see. I already, you said about the scatter plot. That will be actually the last chart about this. So we can give our opinion about a scatter plot in a second. I have one more chart before the scatter plot to show you, which is on the left, we have a dot for the percentage of people with a bachelor degree or higher. And on the right, we have the percentage of obese people. And a line is red if it goes, if it has a positive incline, and it's blue if it has a negative incline. What do we think about this one?
It needs so much explanation to be able to understand it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so let's put our ideas in the chat so I can consolidate them. All lines cross, so easier to see correlation. Not sure how to interpret it. Looks like a crochet project.
I hope my
Messy.
crochet project is not as messy as this.
Looks like abstract art. You need a lot of explanation to be able to understand it. Getting better, but still confusing. A lot of people are saying it's difficult to see the correlation, cannot comprehend.
Yep. Yeah, so it gets a bit better because you can see each state individually if there is a correlation. But you see that it holds for each state separately, but you do not see if it holds true overall. So last but not least, we have what was already mentioned, the scatter plot. Thoughts in the chat.
Hooray! A lot of cheering.
Party. Hooray is the consensus.
This is a lot better. Some people prefer the heat map. You don't get the scale of the state from this scale, but this is still the best so far. Easier to see the correlation. It would be nice to have a legend with the state names. More accurate to understand. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so I think we all agree that this chart is the best chart so far. So it's all in one scatter plot. The dimensions are on the axis, and we can draw a regression line through it. So we can see that there's actually a negative correlation. We can also see some outliers. So we know the District of Columbia is majorly off trend, but still shows the negative trend. So all in all, we get all pieces of information that's necessary to show our case, which is that there is a negative correlation between education level and obesity. I see that someone raised their hand.
Yes, Laura, I mean, I think this data don't prove that. This data prove that the states that do have a higher degree, a higher percentage of people with degrees, have a lower percentage of people obese, but doesn't mean that there's a correlation between having a degree and being obese, because you could have different cohorts within the states. You could have a state that has a percentage of graduates, and then the ones that are non-graduates, which could be maybe the vast majority, could be being influenced by different variables. This is not. Yeah. We are assuming that each state behaves just as a single. of people within there, no?
So we prove that there's a correlation, but not a causation. So we don't know if educating people in a higher degree actually causes people to be less obese or the other way around. So very important difference between correlation and causation. I hope this answers your question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. We can put all these charts side by side as a summary. So data visualization is really a separate field, and it's very important to know what you are doing and when to choose what. So we'll dive into this later of when to choose which visualization. But you see that there are quite some visuals you can choose from, and choosing the right visual is actually really important. So without further ado, let's go into a guide to visualization types. We'll look into these different visualization types. So we have a simple text, a bar chart, a pie chart, line chart, area chart, scatter plot, bubble chart, heat map, and table. This is just a selection of the graphs and visualizations here. There are many, many more. Like we saw the lollipop charts in the previous examples. We will not discuss that one here in depth. We'll discuss the most common ones that are used in more detail and highlight some of the other options out there. So let's get into it. So we have simple text, which is to highlight a number or text. So with this, you can share a number, maybe two numbers, and it's very clear to emphasize that information. So it's really about emphasizing a certain type of data that you have, certain information. Let me give an example in the next slide. So how would you use the simple text? Here on the left, we have the number of children with a stay-at-home mother, which is 41% in 1970 and 20% in 2012. And we use simple text that says 20% of children have a stay-at-home mother in 2012 compared to 41% in 1970. Here we really emphasize on this number, on this 20%. We could have also said 41% of children had a stay-at-home mother in 1970 compared to 20% in 2012. So this really emphasizes one bit of information from this bar chart. There's quite some information in this bar chart, but we're choosing to highlight the 20%. That is what simple text can do. So you can see the difference that here in this bar chart, you get all the context, and here you really emphasize one piece of information. Do know that if you use just simple text, you can lose some context. So if you say, for instance, it has dropped by 50% and you highlight the 50%, you don't know the beginning or the end value, while in this bar chart, you see the beginning and end value, for instance. So you do lose a bit of context if you don't use if you don't describe everything underneath as well, under the simple text. So do bear that in mind while using simple text. Up next is the bar chart. So a bar chart shows change over time, or you can compare different categories or compare parts of a whole. So for instance, we have a vertical, which is best used for chronological data, or when the x-axis can also have a negative value. We also have a horizontal, which is best used with long category labels. So for instance, my hobbies, I've used a horizontal bar chart. Bar charts are used a lot. And I would also recommend to use bar charts because they are common. People are used to them and they know how to read bar charts. There's really a low learning curve for your audience when using a bar chart. Also, bar charts are easy to read for our eyes. Our eyes compare the end points of a bar. So we compare this point to this point and that point to that point to see which one is the biggest, and it's and we can then see the difference. That also means that it's very, very important to always start your bar chart at zero, at a zero baseline. Otherwise, you're giving a false comparison because people are reading this distance between the two. If you do not start at zero, it can really show a different picture. We'll get into that later as well. Horizontal bar charts are also easy to read. You get an automatic Z pattern, which people typically process data. You start at the top left, go to the top right, go to the bottom left, bottom right. So you get a typical reading pattern, and you therefore read everything automatically as well. If you're comparing 3 series or more, make sure that you order the categories in a logical way. For instance, from highest value to lowest value. That is what I wanted to say about regular bar charts. Then you also have a stacked version, which means that you have different categories stacked on top of each other. And you also have a 100% stacked, which means this is 100% and you show what part of a whole a certain category makes. So for stacked, it is important. You best use it when there are multiple parts of a whole, let's say a budget that you are able to spend. And then the value is also important. So that's when you use stacked. You would use 100% stacked if the value is less important to you. So if the ratio is important, but not necessarily the value in and of its own. So then the total would be unimportant, and then you can use 100% stacked. With the stacked, be a little bit careful with these because it gets hard to compare the different categories. So the bottom category is easy to compare because then it becomes a regular bar chart again. On the right, it's a bit harder to compare these different bars, which one is bigger and how much bigger compared to each of the categories. So the lowest is easy to compare, but if you're trying to compare things in the middle, it gets a little bit hard. So be careful when using stacked bar charts, when you're also wanting to compare the individual categories. That's it for bar charts. Let's get into pie charts. pie charts make parts to whole comparisons. And with pie charts, you should only really be using it for very few categories. Pie charts are difficult. We really do not really like pie charts, and I'll explain in a minute why. Audiences can really only understand pie slices when they're degrees that we understand, that are easy to interpret, like 25 degrees, 50 degrees, 75 degrees, or 100. So a quarter, half, 3/4, or a whole, because they are right angles and they're familiar to everyone. Other angles are hard to interpret and people do not interpret them in the same way. So when using a pie chart, only really use it to compare two categories, because we can see if one piece of the pie is bigger than the other. But a donut chart is actually better to use, and I'll explain why. Let's first go through an exercise with the pie chart and the case against a pie chart. So my question is, which of these orange slices is larger, the darker orange or the lighter orange slice? You can try to guess in the chat.
Most people are saying the darker one.
Okay. And then my next question is, by how much?
Difficult to say. Some people are maybe guessing they're equal. Some say by 10%. Impossible to understand.
It's difficult, right? So it's not a trick question. One is actually bigger than the other. By how much? I'll tell you. It's by 8%. But let me therefore also explain to you why pie charts are evil and you should never ever use pie charts. The human eye is really difficult to assign a value to a 2D space, and with 2D I mean an area. 1D would be a line. And we find it also very difficult to compare pie charts. So we're trying to compare this angle to this angle, and humans are really not great at trying to do that. And it also can get very confusing with many different categories. If you do want to use a round chart, go for a donut. Donuts are equally tasty as pies. So, you know, donuts are also nice if you want a sugary snack. But donuts are great because you're actually comparing one arc to another arc. So you're not comparing an angle or an area, you're comparing one line segment to another line segment. And humans are much better at comparing lines to each other than areas or angles to each other. So try to use donuts. If you do use pie, try to only use two categories, or when they're really only right angles, so 90-degree angles. Next up, line charts. By the way, if there are any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll be interrupted. That's okay. Line charts. So a line chart shows a time series relationships and shows trends. With line charts, it's okay to not start at 0 because we're trying to view the trend. So we're not comparing different heights of bars. We're following the line. Do try to start at 0, but it's not essential. So we use this as a time series to show progression over time. Next we have area charts. They show a time series relationship and also be able to represent volume. So we can have a stacked area chart where we show more lines together. And we can have a 100% stacked area chart. This is basically the same as bar charts, but then with a time series relationships. I would try to avoid using these because our eyes and minds are not very great at processing these. If you do use these, again, because it's an area, start at 0, because we will not interpret that if this is 10, that this orange part will actually go further down. So try to start at 0 when you use an area chart. Next up is scatter plots. They are mostly also they show relationships between 2 different items. So they're based on 2 sets of variables and show a correlation. Often scatter plots are used in a scientific field, and they're also viewed to be a bit more complicated to understand for people that are not used to them. When you do use these, try to annotate and highlight to show the interesting parts of a scatter plot, such as outliers or a trend line, or using different colors to show different parts of the data. Annotation and highlighting we'll get to a later part of this training. Next
There's
we have
question in the chat. For time series relationships, we can use both line charts and area charts, as you mentioned. So when can we know what is better to use for the same use cases?
So I'll get to a handy website and charts later that makes you decide or be able to decide which of the 2 to use. But an area chart you would use if you're also in, let me scroll the other way around. An area chart will be useful if you're also trying to show the volume of the, not only the trend, but also the volume. So you're also trying to interpret another piece of information in that one chart. The line chart is really mostly about the trend. An area chart also shows the volume behind the trend. But there will be a handy website and also charts that basically is a decision tree of when to use which type of visual. But we'll get to that later.
Could you please re-explain the difference between a stacked and 100% stacked area chart?
Yeah, of course. So the difference is similar to a bar chart. A stacked area chart is when it's a time series relationship and you show a volume and you put the lines on top of each other. And this stacked area chart is about how much volume there is, so also about the value. 100% stacked area is when the value is not important, but the ratio between the different categories is important. So you're mostly interested in the trend of how the ratio has changed over time. That would be a 100% stacked area chart. Compared to a stacked area chart would be when the values do matter. For instance, your budget has increased and you're using a certain, or in this case, it's new contacts. You can see that the new contacts have decreased in March. Here you do not see the decrease in contacts, but you see that the organic search is a very much a larger part of that month. So if you do not care about the value, use 100% stacked. If you do care about the value, then you just use a normal stacked area chart. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Next, we have a bubble chart. So a bubble chart also shows nominal comparison or ranking in relationship. So the size of the bubble shows a certain value as well. So that is, if you have an additional variable, you could show it in the size of the bubble. When we, for instance, look at the scatter plot that we made for the obesity, we saw, for instance, that, or someone in the chat mentioned that you then do not see the population size per state. We could add that as the size of a bubble in that scatter plot to show that extra variable. The thing about bubble charts is they're a bit tricky because they can get quite busy and they can overlap easily. Like here you can see that these two bubbles overlap. So they can be a bit tricky to interpret, and it can get cluttered and busy easily. That's what I wanted to say about bubble charts. Then we have a heat map. So we use color intensity to represent values of geographical areas or data tables. So we use things like map of a country or of a region. The thing about using things like states is that larger states immediately gain more attention. So be careful with this as well. There is a chart that is a hexagon map, which makes every hexagon an equal amount of size. That does mean, however, that you would need information about all these different regions. And sometimes we only really have information per state or per country. So that makes it a little bit more difficult. So be careful with that. We can also use heat maps in data tables. For instance, if a table has a high value, we give it a darker color. If it has a low value, we give it a lighter color. And data tables often have the same size per cell. So you do not get the state problem of a bigger state has immediately more attention than smaller states. That's what I wanted to tell about heat maps. Then we have tables. Tables are used when you want to communicate a mix of different values. So you can use different units in the same visualization, which is harder to use in other visualizations. We read tables. So with other visualizations, we look at them, but tables you actually read from top right or top left to bottom right in most Western countries. So we interact them without a verbal system. So you have to let people be able to read your table. If you talk over it, people will not be hearing what you're saying, or they will not be reading your table. Tables are useful for a broad audience because the audience can pick and choose what information is important to them. Like I said, it's easy to communicate different units of measurements. And what's important with tables is to let your design of the table fade a bit into the background so you can focus on the numbers. Like I said, you can also combine this with a heat map, so highlight the most important numbers to help people look for them. Questions?
Shall we use heat map when differences in values are not so important?
If the differences in values are not important, I don't know why you would use a heat map. Then you can just maybe highlight the value, the one value that is important. But a heat map wouldn't make too much sense then.
I mean, if I can just explain my question, I mean, just to show that there are some differences in the values, but the amount of difference is not so important between one location and the others. Is that correct? So just showing that there are some differences in the values or increment and decrement in some areas, in certain values, but not to show how much is the value of increment and the difference.
Yeah, you could use, instead of numbers, you can use a heat map instead. That might be interesting, so that you can see the color gradients instead of the numbers. Just like with the states, you can use a table as well, but then don't include the numbers. Yeah. All right. Any other questions?
Do we use Excel for creating all these charts, tables, and maps?
Maps are difficult to create in Excel. All the other charts you can use Excel. For maps, you can use free services online to use it. For instance, I used a website to create the first map in on the introduction slide of the world and where I lived. With all the others, you can use Excel or any other dashboarding tool or Python. You can use whatever you're comfortable with.
There's a question about a cheat sheet for which graph, and I think you already answered that, saying that there would be a decision tree shared.
Yep.
Any specific chart making tool recommendations?
I would just use Excel, to be honest. You have a lot of freedom when using Excel. You can also use Power BI, which is more of a dashboarding tool, but you can use that for making charts. Python has some powerful packages to make charts as well, so you could use that. Yeah, I think those would be my recommendations.
For explanatory charts, we use static, not dynamic, because of the focus purpose.
I don't know if I understand that question.
Okay, I think we can then skip it. There's also some people wondering if we'll have a break soon.
We do, right on time. Great question. Yeah, let's have a 15-minute break. So let's get back at 4 o'clock. So it will be a 17-minute break.
Thanks, Laura.
All right, see you back soon. Getting back from the break. Hope you had a nice break to let everything sink in and give your brain a little bit of a break. All right, let's get into it. So people were already asking in the chat, how do you choose your appropriate visualization? I've shown you a few of the most common visualizations. So now, how do you choose which one to use? So a few questions that you can ask when to choose a visualization are these. Who is your audience? So is there a scientific audience? Yes or no? For instance, can you use a scatter plot, or will they not understand that sort of plot? I think it's important, how well are they acquainted with the data? Then you can go into more detail, knowing your audience and how capable they are with interpreting visualizations can really help determine which visualization you need. Next, what is your goal? Do you want to emphasize one thing? Then maybe use simple text. If you want to show the entire picture, then maybe use a table, for instance, or a scatter plot. What data do you have? What relationship does it show? How many variables do you have? Those sorts of questions you can ask to determine your visualization. How much detail is needed? Do you need all the information, or can you keep it a bit more simple? For instance, with the obesity chart, was it really necessary to add the bubble size for population size? In that case, they decided not to, so they left that part out of the visualization. So ask yourself, how much detail do you need in your visualization? Again, with that, do not try to manipulate. So do not leave out important information that makes your case different. So keep the same message. Just know how much detail to show. And last but not least, not necessarily a question you can ask, but more of a tip. Repetition is good to use. You do not have to use many different chart types just because. People are good at interpreting the same chart again and again. So you do not have to switch between a bar chart and a donut chart because you think a round chart is good for a new for some freshness in your presentation. Having repetition is actually good, and people are good at interpreting charts over and over again and seeing the difference. So those are a few questions that you can ask. The cheat sheet, like I promised, there is sort of a decision tree that you can use. So what would you like to show? Would you like to show a comparison, a relationship, a composition, or a distribution? Let's say you want to show a comparison, then you get 2 questions. Do you want to do that among items, or do you want to do that over time? Let's say that we want to do that over time. Then you get a few questions. Do you have cyclical data, non-cyclical data, single or a few categories, or many categories? And that will point you to a chart that you can use. There are also some websites, for instance, Data2Viz, where they actually have this decision tree as well. And there are also some code examples. For instance, I would like to make this chart in Python, and then they have a Python snippet for that specific chart as well, or a Java snippet or HTML. So that can help you decide on what charts to use. We're going to practice this. So I have an exercise. which is exercise 2 in the GitHub repository. The exercise is the following. You are doing a project in a HR department, and every year they investigate the voluntary turnover rate of employees, so people that decide to leave the company. This is the table of the data, and I'll provide you with, or I guess Kate will provide you with the link where this Excel is present with this information. And my question to you is, how would you present this data in the most insightful way? Do you show a generic overview of the turnover, comparison between 2019 versus 2020? Are there any dates, months, or data that stand out? What might be important for the HR department to know? So the exercise is try to make this information a bit more insightful, or what is the most insightful way to show this data. I think it would be good to take 10 to 15 minutes to create your charts. And I don't know if Kate is adding them in the chat. I can, yes, she has.
Yep.
And perfect. So there will be an Excel file there. So let's take 10 minutes or 13. So we are at a nice round number. And after that, I lied, Kate, at the beginning. I'm sorry. I think it would be good to create breakout rooms to then discuss the visualization that you've made and compare them together. So let's take 13 minutes, and after that, make breakout rooms to compare and discuss. Are there any questions? No? Okay. If there are any questions in the meantime, I'll be here. So feel free to, and I'll be reading the chat. So feel free to ask them in the chat and I'll respond there.
Laura, how large would you like the breakout rooms to be?
How many participants are there? 68, so 66. So I think maybe
5 to 6 per room?
Yep, that would be good.
Okay.
Where should we post the chart? Just keep it to yourself for now. And then when you are in breakout rooms, you can then show your chart within the breakout room. And maybe it would be nice, once you've discussed all the charts that you've made, to then share the ones that you found most insightful from your group. Yes, I can share that link of the decision tree. I will share the links in the chat. And in the zip folder, there's also a different visualization of which chart to use, which is by Power BI, which you can also use as sort of a decision tree. Did it post it as a picture? That's not what I wanted. Or did it? Let me try to post it.
Yeah, no, you sent the link. It's there.
Okay, okay, great. There are 2 links that you can use. just a heads up that you have 2 more minutes before entering the breakout rooms. Can share it in the chat. That would be
amazed with
awesome.
us. You will be amazed when you see ours. Hope so.
Let's see.
This is the one.
Wow. Let me open it up. And what did you like about the specific visualization?
The first one?
Yep.
Yeah, the first one we made, Kashif actually made a rate of change, and we created a combo type of graph. So it gives more information. So we liked it.
Okay. Let's also view the other ones. Oh, I see a cyclical chart. And this one also shows a bit of different coloration. So the biggest one is lighter blue and the smallest one is lighter yellow. It might be nice to give a vote of your favorite chart, which you see in the chat. Let me also display this one, which is the cyclical chart. Very cool, guys.
If you guys want, you can thumbs up your favorite one in the chat.
And then we can see which one has the most thumbs up, and try not to vote for the one in your own group. There's still some charts being shared. Okay. While people are still posting in the chat, I see that while looking in the chat that most people like the one that I just had open. So this one, which also encapsulates or gives a little bit of information of the things that were observed, like the spike with COVID. July and August are summer months. In these months, there are mostly the turnover, and that in November, there's the lowest turnover rate. I think that is really nice to show these sort of insights also already in the charts. All right, let's continue. Let's also talk about some visualization don'ts. I've already named a few, but let's dive into them. Please, please, please start your bar charts at 0. Here you have an example of when you do not start at 0. A guy from the Philippines looks a lot shorter than a guy from the Netherlands, while in real life, the difference is not that big. So this can really make your data look very different. So start at 0 with bar charts. Next up, be careful with cumulative results. Here we have a cumulative result of the annual revenue. And because we constantly add up the annual revenue, you see a line going up, but you'll never see a line going down. And a line going up shows a positive trend, while actually we see that the annual revenue goes down every year. So be careful with cumulative results. Next up, don't use odd shapes, which makes it hard to compare. Here, for instance, we see Afghanistan. Do we use the top of Afghanistan to read the axis? Do we use the part from Wendy's that is at the top, yes or no? Try to stick to normal shapes and sizes. Next up, secondary axis is usually a no-go. It makes it more difficult to process and understand which axis belongs to which. Does a relationship exist? A solution to this, if you do want to use 2 axes, is to label them directly. So don't use y-axis at all, but label them in the charts themselves, or pull them apart vertically. So use one chart here and another chart directly above so that the x-axis do align. Here on the left, you focus on the numbers. On the right, you focus on the trends. So you can see the difference between these two, but these could be 2 solutions to not use a secondary axis. Next, be aware of manipulation. So what has been done here is the y-axis has been inverted, which shows the trend basically the opposite way around. Here it has the stand your ground law, and here it's trying to show you, or it's trying to make you think that the number of murders committed using gun violence have decreased after that law has been implemented. But actually it has increased, which is then difficult to see because we see the line going down. But because the y-axis is inverted, it's actually going up. So be aware of how you show your data actually might have a manipulative effect. So be careful of that. Most importantly, be correct. Here you see the bar, which is lowest, actually has the highest number. This is just all wrong. Make sure that your bars, whatever you show, is correct. It would surprise you how many people actually make this mistake. For instance, using a table and the sum actually doesn't sum up to whatever is listed in the table. Make sure you double check that your chart is actually correct. And one more thing, don't use 3D. I've managed to get an example where they are not correct and use 3D. So the and use pie charts. So this part of the pie is definitely bigger than this part, but this shows a lower percentage than this one. And 3D is just really hard to interpret. So don't use it, be correct. Those are the major visualization don'ts. That's everything that I have to say about step 2 of choosing your visualization. Next up is step 3, eliminating clutter. So you've made your visualization and you've chosen the right visualization. Now we want to make sure that there is that we're only showing the things that are needed. So humans have a cognitive load, and that means that everything that you see takes part of this cognitive load. Everything takes a part of your memory. So make sure that you are being smart about how you want to use someone's brain power. And perception matters. How hard does the audience need to think? How hard does the audience think they will have to work? So for instance, if they think, oh, this is going to take ages for me to understand, they just check out and they're not going to spend any time on your visualization. Well, if it seems to be easy to interpret, then they're actually going to look at your visualization. Within a few seconds, humans already decide if it's worth their time, yes or no. So make sure that the cognitive load is low so that you can actually send out what you want to send. So what we want to signal is what we want to communicate, and then there is noise around it. So noise that doesn't add value to that message, and we should try to eliminate everything that distracts from this message. So if it doesn't add value, then we should remove it. So let's look at this. We have 2 things that we can do. Lower the ink to data ratio and eliminate clutter. And what we can also do is emphasize the message that you send. And the first 2 is about eliminating clutter. So if you go to the previous slide, we're eliminating the noise. And the third one is where we want to clarify our message. We're now going to focus on the first 2, which is reducing this cognitive load and reducing the noise. And these are, we're going to use or reduce the load using the Gestalt principles. And I saw some of these already being used in the examples of the previous exercise, so that's great. Let's dive into it. If we see this chart, I would like you to name in the chat the things that we can do to reduce the ink to data ratio, which means lower ink to data means that you're having less lines, colors, etc., compared to the data that is being shown. So what noise can we eliminate from this image?
Some of the ideas are removing the grid lines, removing the shadows, taking out the extra zeros in the score chart side, changing the dates to be the names of the months instead of numbers, removing the year, removing markers, removing outliers, taking out patient from the label and explaining what the abbreviations DM, NP, and HW mean, showing the month and name only, adding a title. I think that's that
sums it up. Okay, great. One thing that I've heard that I would not do is removing outliers, because that's actually changing and manipulating your data. Also, titles, you add more ink. But yeah, I agree. We could have added a title here if it's not clear from the context that you are doing. Other than that, yeah, I agree with most of these things that were said. So one thing that I haven't heard yet was removing the background filling. So you see that the background is this brownish color. We could remove that as well. We could remove the markers, which I've heard, shading, removing the grid lines. We can also lighten the axis. So this is now in black, but we can make them a little bit lighter to make them stand out a little bit less. Removing the unnecessary precision. So we could just have 16, 14, 12, etc. Also, we have these labels, this legend, but we can make them direct labels. So to add them to the side of each line. And we could also emphasize one line. So here I'm, just so that you read back, you can have a list of the things that you can think about when lowering your ink to data ratio. And I'm going to show you an example of when that is done. So something that isn't here indeed, which I guess falls under the removing unnecessary precision, is changing the days to months. So that is what I've done in this chart. So we've lightened the axis, we've removed the precision, we've made the months instead of the dates. We've done direct labeling. We've emphasized one line instead of having all the colors of the other lines. Maybe we would just want to look at patient HW. So this is something that you can use to make your charts easier to read for your audience. If there's a lot of noise, people are gonna most likely just check out and think, never mind, this is too difficult for me. But if you make it a bit more, if you remove all the unnecessary clutter, it will really make it easier for your audience to read. So when you think of a chart, when you look at your own chart, think of, are there things I can still remove that will not impact the message I'm sending? The more you remove, the better it is.
There's some questions in the chat. The first is from Melanie. She asks, how do you keep your graphs simple to limit cognitive load, but still make sure that your message seems scientific and accurate? Sometimes too pretty graphics seem less believable. Oh, good question. Use a serious font like Times New Roman. That might help. I think it's about as well, one of the questions, let me try to go back to that slide if I can do that easily, is, let's see, this one, is how much detail is needed in your slide. If it is more scientific, then it might be necessary to add more detail, or I said slide, but I mean chart, of course. If a lot of detail is needed, then there are also quite some variables probably there, which will then make your chart already look a bit more scientific, I guess. So a scatter plot shows different variables, multiple variables, and therefore might be a bit more scientific looking. But I get the that stylized graphs might feel like, oh, you just picked random data and you're trying to show that. Yeah, I think that would be my suggestion, to see how much detail is needed and base your decision on that. But still, cognitive load is an important factor to take into account when making your charts. Okay, there's two other questions, I think, but they're not really phrased as a question, so I'm just gonna read them and see if we, yeah. Sure. So what about using easier to differentiate colors? Isn't it better to use label? So easy to differentiate colors, definitely. So we'll talk about color scheme
as well at a later point. Direct labels like this is definitely handy when there are quite a few labels, because otherwise you're trying to match different colors to different lines, and it can become a little bit of a going back and forth between the legend and the line or the bar. Yeah, so that would be a reason why you would use direct labels instead of the legends.
And last question, and then we can move on. Do you have any recommended graphs for qualitative data?
For qualitative data, word clouds are great. So we've shown that before. I think it would be best to combine, if you have that, quantitative data together with qualitative data. So one example that was there already in the chat is adding wording to your charts. So when you want to explain certain behavior that you see, adding information at that point in your chart, you can add qualitative data there. Also, you can use icons to make your qualitative data a bit more clear and structured. So icons also speak to people, and with an icon, you can immediately already know what a text is going to be about. So if you really have a large piece of text that you're trying to show in a graphic, try to use icons to summarize a piece of text that has a certain topic. I hope that answers the questions.
Yes, thanks. Okay, that's all for now.
Okay, great. Then let's continue to some of the oh yeah, no, that was correct, to the Gestalt principles. One of these principles is proximity. When things are closer together, they are thought of belonging in a group. So you can give focus on certain rows or columns. So what we see here, for instance, is these feel like they're all belonging to a group, but now giving them space in between and making these closer together, we can distinguish 3 different columns. So proximity is a powerful principle that you can use in your visualization. Something else that you can use is similarity. So you can use similar color, shape, size, orientation, and when objects have a similar color, for instance, or a similar shape or a similar size, they are thought of belonging in a group together. So this can be used in a table, for instance, and there's no need to border. For instance, there's no need to give borders to your table if you color the rows. So if you color a row, that row is already thought to belong together because it has the same color. So use that wisely. Next up, you have enclosure. So objects that are physically enclosed are thought of belonging together. For instance, here you can see that without this box, you would have a group of 3, a group of 4, and a group of 5. But now with this box around it, these 4 points are thought to be part of a group as well. Without the box, they would definitely not be thought to belong together. What you can use enclosure for is, for instance, for a graph with actuals and forecast, that you enclose the data points that are part of the forecast. Then we know that these data points belong together while these data points belong together. Next up is closure. We fit objects to constructs we already know, like circles and squares, and therefore we don't necessarily need borders around pictures. For instance, we already know that this is a circle. We do not need the circle to be complete for it to be a circle to us. Also with this chart, we do not need the box around it because we can imagine the box around it ourselves. We do not need the borders to know that that is a picture. One example, for instance, is this logo, which I think we know. We know that this is a panda bear, and we do not need the additional lines to finish the head of the panda bear, because we know that this is the construct of panda we all know. So therefore, we do not need to actually finish or close the panda. So do not feel the urge to enclose things that are not necessary. Next is continuity. We seek the smoothest path, and naturally create continuity. So for instance, we do not need a y-axis because we already see that this is a bar chart that lines up to the right. So we do not need this extra line in this bar chart, for instance. We also see this continuity of this line, which then adds color as well. But we can also add continuity. We seek smoothness, so we follow this certain color as well. Next up is connection. Objects that are physically connected to each other are thought of as a group. This principle is stronger than any of the other principles that I've just shown. So this is basically the most powerful one that you can use. Things that have a line in between them are thought to be more connected to each other than others. So even though these two have the same color, we see that this is more connected to each other than the colored lines, the colored circles. Also size, the connection is stronger than the size. Shape, the connection is stronger than shape. And also enclosure, or the connection is stronger than enclosure. So connection is really the most powerful tool that you can use when creating your charts. I have one more exercise, which is to take this chart. It's going to be put in the chat as well, the link. Take this chart and make it a lower ink to data ratio and try to connect the text into the graph. So this is basically the same information that we had in the previous exercise. This is just the 2020 information about turnover. And here are some highlights from the chart. So try to make this a lower ink to data ratio and try to highlight, tie the text into the graph. So this is also tying in qualitative data together with quantitative data. Let's take 10 minutes for this exercise. So we'll be back at 5:10. Or not raise their hand. I saw that Anna's had already shared one in the chat. Oh, let me resume share. Nice. This is actually very similar to one that I have here. So let's discuss some of the solutions that you can do. So what you can do is indeed, as Anna's also did, is keep the highlights on the right and highlights the different bar charts, or the bars that have a certain principle, and show that as a highlight in show that color as well in the highlight, so you can easily connect the two together. What you can also do is put the text immediately in the graph. So above the bar of the month of April, also give the text of the month of April. Same holds for the summer months as for the November, December months. We can also use the highlighting or encapsulating enclosure. In this case, it's easy because the bars are stacked from highest to lowest. If we would do it in a little bit of a different order, let's say that in April there was a restructuring and therefore there was a peak, then it might have been a little bit more difficult to do this. I see that a lot of people have used coloring, enclosure, removed the grid lines, all very good, very nice. I see that people have also started voting in the chat about what they'd like to see, so that's also great. Yeah, looks nice. I hope that you see that with quite little effort, you can really make your graph more clear for your viewers. And here you can also combine qualitative data within your charts and using colors as well to highlight things together. Last but not least is step 4, drawing attention where you want it. So this is, we've talked about reducing cognitive load. This is how to clarify your message and emphasize your message, which is about pre-attentive processing. So we're going to play a little game, which is count the threes. How many threes do you see in this picture? I would like you to count them. Everyone is saying 6. I mean, I believe that you guys can count, but it's hard to do. Like, you have to go through all of it to see that there are 6 threes. But if I highlight them, then it becomes a lot easier to count the threes. So if you already know that your message for your audience is to see all the threes, why not emphasize those numbers? That will make things a lot easier. So this is the power of pre-attentive attributes. Let people see what we want them to see before they even know that they're seeing it. So we're gonna play a little bit more games, which is test where your eye is drawn to. So I'm gonna show you a photo, and then without thinking, let me know what the first thing is that you notice. And you can type it in the chat. Okay, let's go to the first photo. Everyone is saying stop, which of course is what you see at first. You cannot look anywhere else. It's red, it's bright, it's in bold, big letters. There are all cues you would use as well when you want to highlight your data. So if you want to highlight something specific, make it big and make a color that is present. Buckingham, I don't think that was the first thing you saw. I think the first thing you saw was stop and then Buckingham. All All right, so you can see that making something big and bold can really highlight something. So you use that as well in your data visualization. Next photo. Where's your drawn to first? Here in the chat, you already see two different answers. Some people say the sun, some people say the airplane. Most people would go for the sun first, and then go for the plane, but multiple things are emphasized, and this creates tension. So you don't know what you should focus on. Is it the sun? Is it the plane? So this creates tension in your photo or in your visualization. As I see in the chat, left to right indeed is what most people do. You start on the left and you go to the right. So let's go to the next photo. Where's your eye drawn to first? So I see some people saying sail, see some people going for the pink sign. Yeah, so this already is a bit more hard where your eye is drawn to. So there's people mostly go for the bright pink sign first and then go down to the right because that's our reading direction, which means that everything that's on the top left corner gets ignored easily. So if we start on the pink sign and then go to the bottom right, then we wouldn't notice this garage sale sign from 329 Walnut Street. So take this into account to understand the larger space of your image, that if you put something in the middle and your attention goes there, that people might miss things on the top left corner. And people are definitely not seeing these horses on the top right. That is for sure. All right. One more. Where's your eye drawn to? I see someone saying everywhere. So I guess here it's everywhere and nowhere all at once. So color is awesome for a birthday party, but color is not an awesome goal for your visualizing data. It makes it difficult to focus on a single thing for a longer period of time. So try to use muted colors and really use something bright or bold to make something stand out. So use colors for birthday parties. Do not use too many colors for data visualizations. I have one more for you. Where is your eye drawn to? The green blueberry, I think it's a grape. But this really shows the power of using color strategically. So here what you can really do as a test, as we did here, is make your visualization, look away and look back and see what stands out to you first. If you've been looking at your visualization nonstop, ask a friend or a colleague to look at your visualization. That can really help to see if you're emphasizing the right things. Try this test with your own visualization to see what stands out. There are some pre-attentive attributes that you can use to make things be more, get more emphasis. So these are the following. You can have different orientations, shapes, line lengths, line widths, size, curvature, added marks, enclosure, hue, intensity, spatial orientation, and motion. So you can use these attributes to give emphasis to your visualization. So your eye is always drawn to the thing, to the element that is different from the rest. This can also be used with text, for instance, making text bold or italic or underlined, because people will immediately go to that piece of text. There are some things, though, and I will show you, that have some quantitative meaning, such as the line length or spatial position. If a dot is lower, that might also make people think that the value is lower. Or if a line is shorter, they might think that that means something for the value of that line. Same holds for line width and size and intensity. Those can be associated to relative values. So a thicker line might be worth more than a thinner line, or a bigger size dot is worth more than a smaller size dot, or a less colored dot is worth less than a 100% intensity dot. So be a little bit wary of those. The others are categorical values. So those can be used a bit more nonchalantly, I guess. Or you can use them with a bit less attention. So when you don't over-clutter with these pre-attentive attributes, you can draw attention quickly to where you want people to look, and you can create a visual hierarchy. So as I said before, people have 3 to 8 seconds in which they decide whether to continue to look at what we show them or direct their attention elsewhere. So make sure that within that 3 to 8 second time window, you have your audience looking where you want them to look, and you can use these pre-attentive attributes to do so. So the most important attributes for data visualizations are size. Equal size means equal importance. So if things are a larger size, that means they are more important. Next up, we have colors, and use color strategically. Think about when we counted the 3s. What would happen if I made every single number a specific color? It would then also make it more difficult to count the 3s, even though the 3s are all the same color and might stand out from the rest. It would still make it more difficult. So really try to use color in a strategic way. Also use color consistently. That makes it easier for your audience to understand what color means what. And changing in color signals can change in meeting. One more important tip about color is to use gray as a base instead of black, because it gives more contrast to other colors than black would do. Black also stands out from itself, and gray is a bit more muted, so it gives a bit more pop to anything that's not gray. And be careful with color blindness. Like I said, red and green color blindness is the most common color blindness. So try not to compare or combine those in one chart. That is important to know. Most companies have already thought about that while creating their color palette, their corporate color palette. So try to use that as well. Next is, or something else, and also an important attribute for data visualization is position. So people read in a Z shape. So try to eliminate work for the reader by putting the most important information at the top of your slide or picture. So that is the most important attributes. Yeah. So this is something, all the things that I wanted to tell regarding these 4 steps. Like I said, there are 6, but we're not gonna dive into step 5 and step 6 today. So just to summarize, give a quick summary of what we've done. We've looked at understanding the context. Who are you telling your story to? What needs to be addressed? And how will data help me make that point come across? Step 2, choosing the appropriate visualization. So which data do I have and what visualization is good for the data that I want to show? Eliminating clutter. So make sure you have enough white space. Try to delete all the information that is really unnecessary. And also look at how you can draw attention where you want it to go. So close your eyes, then open them again, look away, look back, see where your eye is drawn to first. Yeah, that is all the steps that I wanted to tell. As you might remember from the agenda, I have some last tips and tricks up my sleeve. But first, are there any questions? No questions?
There's a hand raised.
Oh,
Alvaro, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question related to what you were mentioning on the position, or in general, some issues related to color or other tips. Are they universally across the world? I'm thinking that maybe, for instance, Arab writers may see position in a different way, or maybe, I don't know, in different parts of the world they may have a different free attentive, let's say, exposure to colors or to sizes. Are all of these advices that you gave us even all across the world? Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. With regards to position, that is something that can really change across cultures. Like you said, in the Arab world, they read the other way around. So they are more likely to start at the top left corner instead of the top right corner. So in that case, it's also knowing your audience. When it comes to size, don't quote me on this, but I don't think that that is very different around the world. Colors, I actually do not know. It might be that around the world, different colors have different signals. For instance, blue is seen as quite a calm color, while red is seen as a vibrant, bold, alerting color. I don't know if that's different around the world, but I think all stop signs are red. So that, I don't know if that's different around the world. But it could be interesting to Google a little bit about these sort of colors and what they mean in a certain culture when you choose your color scheme.
DR has a question. Go ahead. DR, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I have a question. Mine is based on the word cloud, which Laura mentioned for qualitative data, as also the visualization. For visualization of given the textual data or other heterogeneous data sets. Are you able to use that word cloud?
Do you mean, are there tools where you can make your qualitative data into a word cloud? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are a few Python packages which does this, which is nice because that means you can keep your data on your own local laptop or server, etc. I'm very sure that there are also online word cloud generators, which would mean that you would need to put your data on the cloud as well. So yeah, I would suggest a Python package. I will need to look up exactly which one, but I'll post it in the chat as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
There's another question. Ken asks, what advice can you give to those designers who are limited with prescribed colors, fonts, font sizes for their organization?
What can I advise? I think most important is to look at the lower ink to data ratio. So try to lower that as much as possible. I mean, you might not personally like the color scheme, but your organization has chosen that color scheme. So roll with it, I would say. Use gray as your base and add on top the color scheme of your organization to emphasize things. Like the ORTEC color scheme has a lot of big, bright colors. So normally I would use quite a muted tone and then add on top with the colors of the organization.
Valeria says, sometimes I have to deal with data that needs to be compared, but they are very different sizes. Any suggestions on how to deal with that in a visualization?
With different sizes, do you mean the size of the data set?
No, for example, sometimes we work in different countries and we have certain indicators also in absolute numbers, but in some countries, for example, the targets or results are a small number, let's say. In others are maybe thousands or 100,000s of people, things like that. So I struggle sometimes to make the visualization able to to explain, because also even the numbers you deal with are very different. I don't know if I explained it better.
No, it makes sense. I think that depends on how many other variables you have, but you can always use things like a bubble chart to show the difference between having a very small number of data points versus a very large number of data points. That could be, or making a note out of it, adding that note to your data points as well, where you say how much data points you have to represent this data. I think might be good as well, having a little legend that shows the difference. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Eamon has a comment for data science. I see in most tutorials using heat maps, using squares like a matrix and tables. Actually, they don't focus on drawing nice charts. I guess that's not really a question, comment.
Yeah.
I think that's all the questions that are in the chat, so we can move on.
Okay, great. Then let's move on to the storytelling tips. First tip, one slide is 1 point. So try to make sure that only one message is there for each slide. If you try to combine multiple messages in one slide, people will then, while you're speaking, already maybe move on to the next part of the information that was on the slide. So try to make one slide 1 point. And you can always have backup slides that go into more detail later. Next is preempt obvious questions. So if you already know that your audience will have a certain question already included in your chart. So for instance, here we see this dip in the south. Here they've already added a piece of text that would answer the questions that the stakeholders might have about this dip. That would mean that, okay, they now have that information, they can focus on the rest. So try to preempt obvious questions that might occur. Next, you can add a call to action to your chart. For instance, here in the title, then the stakeholders already know what you want from them. So here it says, please approve the hire of 2 FTEs. And with that, they give the data information of why that they would need to do that. So you can add a call to action in your chart already. Next, it's not always about fantastic detailed analysis. Sometimes simple charts are really what's best to get your message across. You might be able to make this chart based on the information that you have with the data, but think really about how much detail is needed and focus on getting your main message across and not trying to fit everything in one chart. And also you can build the graph step by step to show progression. So instead of showing the whole graph at once, you can show it step by step to keep focus on a specific part of the graph. For instance, this is only the 2013 data. And then we focus on the first quarter of 2014. Then we move on to a full year. And next we show the spike. So this can help building a step-by-step showing progression and focusing only on one part of your chart. Because if you would show the chart in its entirety immediately, your main message might not get across immediately. So that can also help with your storytelling. I have one more closing slide for the main takeaways that I hope you take away from this course. So importantly, know the context. Before you start even thinking about making a chart, try to see who is your stakeholder, what needs to be addressed, and how will you show that with data. So try to think of this big idea and your 3-minute story to scope the context of your story. Form follows function. So choose the right visualization and make sure that you get the right amount of detail across. Less is more. So declutter your image, use the Gestalt principles that I've shown, and make sure that your visualization is not taking up a lot of cognitive load. Also, focus the attention to where you want your audience to go. So use the preemptive processing, for instance, making something bold, making something colorful, to get their attention drawn where you would like their attention to go. And last but not least, have a clearer message. Like I said, the 3-minute story and the one big idea, have that clear before starting making your visualization. That will really help to make your visualization and make your data speak for itself, because your message was already very clear. And also, pie charts are evil, use donut charts instead. And when you tell your story with data, try to combine all of these things to make a compelling story with data. That is all what I wanted to say today. I hope you enjoyed this training. Let me know if there are any questions or comments. Yeah, and if not, then enjoy the rest of the fellowship program. I hope the rest of the courses will be as good as this one, of course. But in all seriousness, I hope you will learn a lot.
Thanks, Laura. Just a couple of announcements before we end today's session. I've dropped in the chat the link to the survey, so please remember to fill it out. On Wednesday, you have the Power BI course. You do have pre-work that you need to do. If you don't do that beforehand, it's going to be very difficult to follow along. So please take some time to fill it in. And if you have any challenges, you can put those into the Slack channel and we can assist you through there. Also, there is a participant who doesn't have a name associated, so we're not able to count your attendance. So the person who has Galaxy A as your name, if you can please let me know your full name so we can count your attendance. And if you guys have any additional questions, I can raise them in the chat function, but also want to echo thank you so much, Laura. This was very nice session. I think everyone really appreciated. I see lots of smiles and hearts, so thank you so much. And if you don't have any questions, then we also can end the session. Yeah, I guess there's no questions, so it's very thorough.
Good to hear.
All right, thanks, Laura.